This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Ooh, good evening, everybody. Wow, are we okay audio-wise?
A little tinny.
Little tinny, okay, yeah, so have to go through these sound checks before we really get going. Wow, it's really great to be here in Ashland. I am so thrilled to be here. I've heard about Ashland for a long time, and it certainly has lived up to every word, every I, every T, everything. So thank you all for coming out. This is really wonderful. JL is going to be my assistant tonight. She's going to be advancing the slides for us. So I'm going to ask her to go ahead and advance to the second slide, if she would. I call myself an investigative mythologist. This is a title that I've made up for myself. It was something, kind of an inspired title. I had to come up with something. And I came up with investigative mythologist. And all of a sudden, I've got people all over the world wondering how they can become one too. And so I just say, well, unplug from the real world and read a couple thousand books, and that'll get you going. And you can take it from there. So when a traditional mythologist looks at myth and scripture, they're thinking, wow, well, this is a piece of literature that has a literal meaning to it. If they're advanced, they might suggest that it has a historical meaning. They might then go on to say that there's an allegorical or metaphorical meaning behind myth and scripture. Then there's a fourth category that they'll subscribe to where they say it has a symbolic value, and that's traditionally where they're going to stop. But what I started noticing in my personal investigations is that myth, scripture, sacred traditions, sacred texts are loaded with references to a higher spiritual functioning of the human body. In fact, I think that is the purpose of myth and scripture, is to encode, if you will, a landscape, and the landscape that is described is our bodies themselves. What is the human body? That's one of the central questions that I pose and I'm going to ask you to contemplate tonight. I'm also going to suggest to you that myth and scripture are loaded with references to an advanced ancient technology, something that your mainstream or traditional scholars and investigators simply won't accept, and so therefore they won't go down that rabbit hole, if you will. But once you do, you're into a whole magical world that can unlock some tremendous secrets. I'm going to introduce a self-serving letter that I received recently from a person. He says, "Dear Mr. Henry, I'm a huge fan and have been following your work for years. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you've done to help reawaken all previous sleepwalkers, such as myself." Now, true story, when I first started writing books in 1996, I got a letter from a postal worker, I think in Washington, saying, "Dear Mr. Henry, I'm the Messiah. Can you please tell me what I'm supposed to be doing?" So I took this as an affirmation that I've ascended to a higher level and have zeroed in on just what my purpose actually is. And it's not an insult to say that we're sleepwalkers. Many of us have been sleepwalkers, and all of us are in the process of awakening, and there are varying degrees of awakening. So I really appreciated it when I received this letter, and that's why I wanted to share that with you this evening. The primary tool in my repertoire, if you will, that assists me in this endeavor to reawaken all previous sleepwalkers is this idea of the ladder or stairway to heaven. Every single religious tradition speaks of this ladder, some in more detail than others. Probably the primary example in the Bible of the story of the stairway to heaven comes from the book of Genesis and the story of Jacob. In the story, Jacob laid his head on a stone. Go ahead, JL. As seen in this painting by William Blake. Jacob lays his head on a stone and he goes into a dream. And in this dream, he sees a ladder or a stairway ascending into the heavens with angels ascending or descending on either side. Jacob scales the ladder, and please note the musical term. He scales the ladder and goes to a higher, finer realm. He comes back down, he awakens from his sleep, and he takes a look around and he says, this place sucks. Well, that's not exactly what the Bible says. What the Bible says is, terrible is this place. Awesome is this place. Powerful is this place. You know, kids today, if you say, hey, that's sick, they understand that that's something that's really cool. So maybe Jacob really did say this place sucks, and we're just coming back to understanding. Jacob went to a higher, finer realm and came back and looked around and said, this is an awesome, powerful place. This is none other than the gate to God, and this is the gate to heaven. The name of the place where Jacob had his experience was called Luz, which is the Spanish word for light. It may be that what Jacob actually experienced was a gate of light that took him to a higher, finer realm, perhaps even bodily, although it's indicated it's a dream state. Go ahead, Joel. I call the place where Jacob went lucidity. Lucidity. I think he experienced a moment of absolute and total mental clarity. And I further think that what he experienced was a full activation of latent capabilities within his body. And what we see here is a comparison between William Blake's painting of the Stairway to Heaven and the human brain, mind, and spinal cord system, making it clear that the ladder or stairway to heaven that Jacob experienced is not out here somewhere, it was in here. And what he scaled was human potential. In fact, the Zohar, the Jewish mystery text, states that the ladder of Jacob symbolically allowed him to see all levels of consciousness as one, all awareness knit into one whole. Each rung of the ladder represents a different level of consciousness. And when Jacob peers into this other realm, he peaked. And Jacob, in fact, in the Zohar, is viewed as the peak of human perception, or the peak of human perfection, rather. Now, notice the wordplay or the pun involved here. It brings up a question. Did Jacob peak because he peaked? Or did he peak and then he peaked? Or does it matter? Either way, he's a peak performer. And the idea is that it's because of his experience with the ladder, being able to see all of creation as if it's one whole unity. Gilgamesh is another peak performer. In one of the oldest examples of human literature, the king Gilgamesh learns that he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. And in order to ascend to the level of the immortals, to the gods, he's got to cleanse and purify that 1/3 of himself that is still human. Gilgamesh goes on a quest in search of the mountain of the gods, the herb of the gods, and the gate of the gods. And as portrayed here, Gilgamesh is standing in that gate. And we notice that he has scaled a ladder or a flight of steps. We see him standing in the gate, and we notice these squiggly lines surrounding him, which are symbolic of water. But they're also symbolic of frequency or vibration. And it occurs to me that Gilgamesh is standing in a gate that is either composed of water or frequency or vibration, a water gate, if you will. Go ahead. Today, a gentleman who rediscovered the herb of the gods and claimed that he frequently climbed the tree of the gods, well, let me spell it out for you, was a heavy user of marijuana and claimed that that was the inspiration for many of his greatest ideas, literally invented the idea of the traversable wormhole. The name of the person? Dr. Carl Sagan, who in the 1980s wrote a book about first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. He had a little problem, though. He didn't believe in this whole idea of flying saucers. Flying saucers aren't real. Yet he's writing a book about first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. And his conundrum was, how is he going to get his civilization from point A in the universe to point B, Earth? And this is when he hooks up with his colleagues at Caltech and invents the idea of the traversable wormhole, an idea that has since inspired numerous other authors and filmmakers. Carl Sagan's film Contact, starring Jodie Foster, is probably the gospel of the Stargate movement, if you will. Go ahead, Joe. When Jodie Foster in the film receives a message from Vega that enables her to build a machine that opens a hyperdimensional Stargate, that film launches a revolution in our imagination and begins to implant this idea of the traversable wormhole. I believe that what Carl Sagan was implanting in that film is also a belief that I share, that Stargates were a real part of ancient human history. In the film, the name of the character who builds this device called the machine that opens the hyperdimensional Stargate is named Esarhaddon. It's a fact that King Esarhaddon ordered the rebuilding of Babylon just before the time of Nebuchadnezzar in 600 BC. Is Carl Sagan trying to point back to the ancient world, especially to ancient Babylon, where the Babel gate, the ladder or stairway to heaven, once existed? I believe that he was, and it's a solid clue to follow. Other films came along. Dean Devlin's Stargate, of course, is another extraordinary example of this Stargate consciousness that is now all over our planet and found in film and also in television and in books. James Spader played an excellent character called Daniel Jackson. It's funny that in Dallas, Texas, when William Henry's coming to town, they just say Daniel Jackson's coming to town. And everybody gets, what we're going to be talking about is this kind of wacky guy that has a slightly different way of viewing myth in scripture and hieroglyphs and is focused on Stargates. But notice the cover here of Stargate. We see the mountain of the gods that leads to the gate of the gods, two of the primary story elements in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the story in Stargate, we see the ramp, the ladder or stairway going into the water gate, quite similar to the way we saw Gilgamesh depicted a moment ago. And we have to ask the question, is it possible that this might have been what Jacob actually experienced in the ancient world? In Kabbalah, the universe is referred to as the skin of the serpent, which is very important because in this depiction we see another way of portraying the Stargate or the wormhole as cutting a hole through the fabric of space-time. Remember, all of the universe is perceived as one whole by the enlightened beings, but yet it's also possible that we can drill holes in space or tear holes in the fabric of space-time, and that these holes in space can lead from point A in the universe to any point millions or even billions of light years away. And when Jacob peeked and saw the totality of reality, I think it's possible, once again, that what he actually experienced was what we today call the Stargate or a wormhole. This is the way NASA represents the Stargate or wormhole today. This is a warp craft, their term, NASA's term, borrowed from Star Trek, obviously, entering the Stargate here or wormhole, symbolized by the concentric rings. This is sperm entering an egg. Joel? This is sperm entering an egg beside a Stargate entering a wormhole. Any questions? How did we get here? Well, what I'm going to show is that I think we actually came through a Stargate when we came into this realm. We are in fact, Stargate travelers. And when we apply the ancient Egyptian law attributed to Thoth, as above, so below, as within, so without, we see a perfect match here between the sperm entering in the egg and the penis entering the vagina. Can I say that? Penis and vagina? Or rather, the warp craft entering the wormhole. But you get the idea. As above, so below, as within, so without. In the very simple way that we can delineate this concept in a simple symbol is the ring or the circle with the dot in the center, which resembles a human eye, doesn't it? Did I mention that when you go into the index of Gray's Anatomy, the book Gray's Anatomy, and you look up the word Jacob, you're led to the retina of the human eye. And you learn that there are 10 layers to the retina of the human eye, 9 of which have complex Latin medical names. The 10th layer is called Jacob's layer. What if it's possible that Jacob didn't lay his head on a stone? What if he laid his head on a tone, a frequency, or a vibration, a ring, that altered his spiritual vision or his vibration and enabled him to expand his vision, to see what's all around us at all times? Where is that awesome or powerful place? Oh, there it is. Whoop. There it is. Whoop. There it is. Well, it's everywhere. It's wherever we are is the most awesome and powerful place, because it is our body, as I will show, that is that gate to God. In the ancient world, they had an understanding of these gates that is profound. This is Isis, who is beaming energy to Osiris. Osiris is wrapped in a tight-fitting shroud the ancient Egyptians referred to as his crossed body. It's spelled K-A-R-A-S-T, crossed. That's how we pronounce Christ in Tennessee, where I live. People go to the Church of Christ. And you understand that what they're talking about is Christ. Well, in ancient Egypt, they talked about crossed as well, but it referred to a tight-fitting shroud that Osiris wore, preparatory to sailing into eternity upon his ark or bark of the millions of years. Next slide. One of the trademarks or hallmarks of my research is noting, to the consternation of many Egyptologists, that the way the Egyptians portrayed the arc of the billions or millions of years almost precisely matches the way modern science portrays a Stargate or a wormhole. What is going on here? My explanation is that modern science is catching up with what the ancients already knew. They're catching up with the original primordial sacred science that is our inherent heritage, the science of stargates and wormholes. But what they understood is that unlike Jodie Foster in Contact, or unlike the characters in Stargate, it's highly unlikely that we're just going to up and walk through one of these star doors in one of these machines that we walk around in and call the human body. The Egyptians went through a very intensive mental, physical, spiritual, emotional preparation preparatory to that experience. And that's what's lacking in Sagan's vision and what's lacking in the way we've presently been portraying these stargates. What I'm trying to do is alter that situation by incorporating some of the spiritual teachings as well, because that is the only way we're going to be able to open these gates. On the left is a modern depiction of a stargate or a wormhole. On the right is Osiris, the Egyptian god of resurrection, star-walking upon his ship or ark of the millions of years. And here it is in detail, very clear. So the Egyptian pharaohs especially understood that their whole life was to be spent in preparation for walking or scaling the stairway to heaven. And that's what we see here, where the Pharaoh is scaling the stairs just like Jacob. This is the Egyptian god of divine magic or alchemy, Thoth, who's here portrayed levitating, and he's prepared to board the ship of eternity. In detail, scaling the stairway to heaven, preparing to climb aboard the bark or ark of the millions of years, which again matches the modern depiction. This one's rather interesting in the way they portray it. They show the ship coming out of the cosmic waters. We see a dual-headed serpent ship with the stairway to heaven mounted upon it. This is a cartoon. And what this cartoon tells us is that this is a serpent ship, or wormhole, to use a modern term, that is in fact the stairway to heaven. And once again, the similarity is complete. Ra, aboard his Stargate ship. The caption says, "I, even I, know the hidden ways to the doors to the field of the blessed." And notice the cartoon again. He's aboard his ship of eternity, preparing to sail into this gate of stars. I call that a Stargate. And he is aboard his star ship, his wormhole, preparing to sail into that Stargate. What the Egyptians understood and made clear in their artwork is that the only way that we could make this transition or sail in this matter was to have a state of lightheartedness. They symbolized that state of lightheartedness by the feather of truth, of cosmic truth, on this figure's knee at this time. This feather indicated that this person was in cosmic resonance or in tune with the universe itself. The Egyptians had a concept very much like Lynn McTaggart talks about today, with a concept she has called the field. The field connects everything in the universe to everything else, like some vast invisible web. Notice the web work has returned, the idea of heaven as being a web work or something that has been woven together that we can part or tear holes in space in. The craft that this figure, the Pharaoh, sails upon is the bridge to the field of eternity. This field or dimension of the blessed is a sea of intelligent energy that permeates all of creation. It is creation, and it is conscious. Western science, of course, now recognizes these facts. I prefer to use the term craft when we're talking about this ship, because a ship refers to something that sails upon the water, as does the word craft, but the word craft has many additional levels of meaning. I was in Aspen, Colorado once, for example. I gave a talk to the Craft Society. And in Aspen, the word craft stands for can't remember a freaking thing. I told you, we're all about trying to remember this and reawaken. But craft, that's what the alchemists practice, isn't it? The craft. They are masters of the craft. In alchemy, the craft is all about transmuting an impure substance into a pure one. In this case, it's about transmuting an impure soul into a pure soul, a la Gilgamesh. And so the awakened heart is something that is very important in these ancient Stargate teachings. That was what it was all about, was achieving the state where our heart was lighter than a feather. But it's also about peeking behind creation itself and understanding that all of creation is conscious and is in fact mirroring our emotions, our thoughts. And I'd like to cite the example of this cube as a good way to visualize this. This cube is simply 12 lines that are projected on the screen here and brought to life in your imagination as a cube, one that has dimension. In fact, if you look at this cube from one perspective, it looks like you're looking into it, but now you can shift your perspective and suddenly a different face of the cube will appear. Can you all make it shift or jump? To me, this is really the lesson of Earth life, because it says that if that cube is 12 lines projected on the screen and brought to life in your imagination, perhaps this bottle of water is something different than it at first appears to be. In fact, what a science teacher, a quantum physics teacher especially, would tell us is that this water is a collection of plastic, ink, paper, but at another level of understanding, it's energy in motion. And the idea that's expressed here is that we always have a choice in how we're going to view things out here. Again, let's look at the cube from this perspective, and let's label this way fear. Let's label this way up here love. Those are the only two choices we have when it comes to encountering a person, place, or thing. We're either going to put fear into the situation or love. And depending upon what we put out, the golden rule says that's what we're going to get back. Well, the idea here is that if we can master this, that's going to prepare our consciousness for opening into another realm. It's going to prepare us for opening into a realm where our three-dimensional consciousness is, in fact, the core of a fourth-dimensional hyperworld with open gateways into other realms. And so this cube has shown us that it mirrors our thoughts, our energy, and emotion, but here's the payoff. This is why we want to choose love in this incarnation, because that's the only way we're going to be able to cleanse and purify ourselves. We're all 2/3 divine like Gilgamesh and 1/3 human. And the way that we purify that part of ourselves that is 1/3 human is by continually choosing love. A simple affirmation that I believe Jesus used when he transmuted water into wine was, I am love. I am love. Those are, to me, the magic words. So whether you follow the work of Greg Braden and you call this field that the Egyptians talk about the divine matrix, or if you call it the field of the blessed or the dimension of the blessed, as do I, we have to recognize that this field that we are all a part of mirrors our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and it is conscious. This fractal is one of my favorites. It's by Wayne Buchan from 2003. I call it the skin of the serpent. Because remember, the Kabbalists describe the universe as the skin of the serpent. And at another level of magnification, this could be what we're looking at, is the universe itself. It mirrors our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and perceptions. This is the Pharaoh Thutmose III from ancient Egypt. And we notice that what he's looking at is almost an invisible figure here. This is Amun, one of the Egyptian gods, that Thutmose III finds himself face to face with, just like we always find ourselves face to face with the field of the blessed. And what we notice is that from his third eye projects the Uraeus serpent that's able to peer into other dimensions. The Egyptians taught that with the Uraeus they could look into the very tiniest level of reality or expand out into the greatest level of reality. Go ahead. And I think that what we actually are dealing with here when he's peering into the cosmos is peering into the skin of the serpent, seen behind everyday reality. And so let's shift gears just for a moment. One of my favorite quotes is from Pythagoras, who says, "The land of dreams is composed of souls which are gathered into the Milky Way." This gives me an opportunity to acknowledge Ann and Whitley Strieber for allowing me to guest host or co-host Dreamland. If you listen, I want to thank you for doing so. If not, you can listen to Dreamland on unknowncountry.com. We interview some of the greatest thinkers of our time, and it's really exciting to be a part of that. The land of dreams is composed of souls which are gathered into the Milky Way. This is one of my favorite all-time images. It's an image of our Milky Way put together by Caltech. Notice I said image, not photograph, because we can't get outside of our Milky Way in order to take a photograph. But this is what NASA thinks that our Milky Way actually looks like if we could look at it from the outside in. And where you and I stand or sit tonight are looking directly at the galactic center is approximately our cosmic position as souls. We are 26,000 light years from our galactic center. The whole galaxy itself is 90,000 light years across. It's this massive cosmic disk. Here's our sun's relative position in the Milky Way. So we're way out here, and all the good stuff we want is here in the galactic center. But there's no bridge, there's no rope, there's no ladder, there's no apparent way to get from here to here, except unless, of course, we listen to the Mayans, who tell us that in 2012, we're going to be experiencing a rare alignment with our galactic center. Another. What I believe is that the ancients had a Milky Way-based metaphysics. I think that they were absorbing teachings that came from the outside of our planet, and where they came from was from somewhere within the Milky Way, or perhaps even beyond the Milky Way, from a race that shared this perspective that we've only recently regained. And so when we look at the Milky Way, I think we can think of her as the great cosmic mother. She is the ship, the ark that we're all floating over the celestial waters of the abyss upon. She's the great ark that contains all life as we know it. She was in the Talmud, the Spirit of God that hovered over the waters like a dove. Next. Which spread her wings over her young. And in this case, her young are the stars and planets that inhabit the Milky Way, including our own, of course. So we have a selection here of some of our sister galaxies. And as we look at these images, we have to ask how many inhabited worlds are actually contained within these worlds, within these celestial disks. This is one of my favorites, this swirling galaxy. Next. This is a human zygote. This is a human zygote beside a galaxy. Again, any questions? As above, so below, as within, so without. This is a galaxy that's shaped like a fetus. This is a human fetus. Next. And notice this galaxy here. It collided with another, and now it's splitting to form new galaxies over here. And notice again the fetal shape of this galaxy. And so when the galaxy splits, it created an intergalactic pipeline with its neighbor galaxy. And notice, go back please. Notice the intergalactic pipeline shared between this fetus and its mother. Same kind of concept. Next. We really are cosmic eggs. Our bodies are composed of galactic material. Joni Mitchell saying we are stardust, and that's an absolute scientific fact. That is what we are composed of. These galaxies here are all bunching together. These look like a whole bunch of fireflies on a hot Tennessee summer night. This is the furthest distance that the Hubble Space Telescope has been able to see, this blue light right here. It's about 13 billion light years away. I believe in what my research reveals is that there was a common nursery for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Zoroastrianism, just to name a few. They all came from the cosmos itself. And in fact, what science is now beginning to understand is that the whole universe as we know it is shaped like one gigantic soccer ball with hundreds of billions of galaxies inhabiting it. This is a favorite painting by an anonymous Japanese painter that encodes kind of the cosmic predicament that we all share. This is Kuan Yin, who's holding this rod in her hand, and in the rod is a string that's attached to this golden orb. Go ahead. And as we notice in this detail of the golden orb, we see that there's an umbilical cord wrapped around this baby soul. And as the baby soul is looking back at the cosmic mother, it doesn't look very happy. It's like, what do you want me to leave the pure place for? And the cosmic mother is saying, you're my emissary of peace. You must incarnate in that three-dimensional realm. And you must bring peace and love and joy into that place. And we notice in this painting is that as we follow the umbilical cord, it continues on and it goes down to this craggy, rocky area down here, which the artist has defined as Earth. Told you Earth sucked. Well, at least compared to where we've come from, and perhaps where we're going as well. The fact is, the Mayans tell us that in 2012, a ladder is going to emerge from the central spiritual sun, the galactic center of our Milky Way. And from out of the ladder is going to appear a serpent rope. And riding upon the serpent rope is an enlightened being called Quetzalcoatl, or perhaps a group of enlightened beings. I have a friend and colleague named John Major Jenkins who has taken out the archaic Mayan term serpent rope and inserted the modern word wormhole and came up with the brilliant idea that what the Mayans say is going to happen in 2012 is that a wormhole is going to open from the galactic center, and from out of this wormhole is going to emerge an enlightened being, or perhaps a group of enlightened beings. Well, I find it remarkably enlightening to contemplate the similarity between the Maya diagram here and this from the Japanese painter. I think that the umbilical cord that is portrayed here in this painting and this serpent rope and wormhole are actually the same thing. And it answers the question of how we came into this realm. We came through an umbilical cord that today we call a serpent rope or a wormhole. And reacquainting ourselves or fully understanding the secrets of that umbilical cord is the purpose of our lives, because reconnecting with that intergalactic pipeline is what is going to renew not only ourselves but our entire civilization. So I've gone back and looked for examples of other serpent rope riders. I found one here in ancient Iraq. This is Marduk chasing the serpent Tiamat, which is, again, remarkably similar to the way the Maya portrayed the serpent rope and the serpent rope rider. This is Enki here, the Sumerian god of enlightenment, who's also riding upon a serpent ship. And in this case, we notice that the ship is half human and half serpent, with a coiled tail at the very end, suggesting a vortex, suggesting something that is spiraling through the galaxy like a wormhole. This is a photograph I took behind my apartment several years ago. We have a male, we have a rope with children that are attached to it, and a female at the very end. It just seems like this is an image that recurs over and over again. Well, what I took from all this interesting bit of imagery is that, especially with the NASA image here of the warp craft entering the wormhole, is that when we see the image of the two-dimensional concentric rings here, it symbolizes not only vibration like sound waves But this two-dimensional image of the concentric rings actually represents a three-dimensional experience, going through a vortex. So I began to train myself that anytime I see now in art an image of the two-dimensional concentric rings, I'm thinking it's an opening of a gateway, or a vortex, if you will. And so, in fact, this image here is actually the mouth of what we think of as the wormhole. And if you could enter this here, you could travel here as if there were nothing in between. This type of imagery is surfacing in crop circles in a major way. This is from 2006, a photograph by Lucy Pringle, one of my favorites that shows the in and out of the wormhole, featuring the concentric rings that symbolize not only vibration again, but the vortex. The Dogon tribe of ancient Africa talked about beings that came from the stars, and they portrayed the descent of these beings using the concentric rings. And this is how they portrayed the beings themselves. They were fish-like creatures. In fact, as this mythology of these fish-like creatures from the stars, especially from Sirius, as a matter of fact, developed in ancient Iraq, we started seeing images such as this, where priests clad in fish suits stood before a radiant pillar while the gods hovered above in their whirling craft. Go ahead. And this is Oan's, an example of one of these beings that's clad in this fish suit here. He's got his pail in which he has his purifying substance, a soma-like substance that promised immortality. And here they are harvesting some kind of a substance from this tower, probably the same soma substance, the purifying substance that they put in the pail. But again, notice the fish suit that this figure is wearing. This is another example of the concentric rings. Can anybody identify this symbol or logo? This is called the Seal of Atlantis. According to Plato's description, Atlantis had a central canal that was surrounded by concentric rings that all met together in a central cross, a central crossing point. And so again, using this, what we've been trained to see now with the two-dimensional image of the concentric rings representing the 3D experience, we ask the question, what happened to Atlantis? Was Atlantis, in fact, a gateway, a portal, a vortex that submerged somehow, or just simply dissolved itself back into space-time? This is Dr. Paul Schliemann's diagram of Atlantis from 1912, showing the central portion of Atlantis with the concentric rings with the target in the center. This is the 2004 Republican Convention. It seems as if William Henry and Karl Rove are the only two people on the planet that got this joke. Because you see, the water, the blue in this canal, blue always symbolizes water. And we have a Red Sea here. So what happened is President Bush walked on water, parted the Red Sea, and stood in the center of the Seal of Atlantis as the king of the new Atlantis. This came shortly after we had looted ancient Iraq of its wealth of incredible artifacts that all undoubtedly had to do with ancient stargates and portals. But when I saw this, I was in total shock. I'm wondering, what's Karl Rove smoking? The same thing Carl Sagan was smoking? Or what were they trying to say here? Well, it's hard to say, but here he is in the presidential seal with the concentric rings all around him, and that's the key point. The president is standing in the seal with the wings on either side of him in the concentric rings, because this is how all the ancient gods were portrayed. They flew in the stars in their winged craft, in their winged rings, holding in their hand their chakra of power, their ring of power that's called the ring of cosmic sovereignty. When figures are portrayed holding this chakra of power or ring of cosmic sovereignty, what it indicates is that they can pretty much do anything they want. They are fully pure beings. Now, there's a little bit of discrepancy here between the purity of these two figures, but the message is the same that they're trying to convey. the president is here saying, I am a sovereign being. I am the king of the new Atlantis, the king of Earth itself. Following on the Atlantean theme, Homer called the people of Atlantis the Meropes, the people of Meru, M-E-R-O. They were called that because of a pillar that was in the center of Atlantis called Meru, the cosmic axis, the ladder or stairway to heaven. This is a diagram from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript of the Meru Pillar. Next. And what we see as we follow these details is that we have what appear to be vertebrae culminating in this triangular apex that represents Shambhala, the realm of the immortals, the realm of the immortals. And here is in this detail the very apex of this, what looks to be an antenna. And in fact, the Mongolians who made this diagram would agree that this is an antenna. That's what they said it was. And the immortals dwelled near this cosmic vortex because of the energy that was emitted from it. Well, I was in Florida giving a presentation on this subject once a few years back, and a scientist came up to me afterward, and he said, I was basically asleep through your presentation till you put up that blueprint. And I said, what blueprint? And he went through my slides until he came to this diagram right here, and he said, that blueprint. And he proceeded to tell me that he designed particle beam weapons for a living, you know, Luke Skywalker type Star Wars weapons. And he said, this right here is a particle accelerator, similar to one that was used in the splitting of the atom. And so I went home and I consulted God, or a form of God, Google, and typed in particle accelerator. And here is Ernest Lawrence's diagram of a particle accelerator like the one used for this, in the splitting of the atom. And I can see where that scientist was coming from. These two diagrams are strikingly similar. Well, today, 50 years after the splitting of the atom, or 60 years after, science is now envisioning building giant space-based particle accelerators that open stargates. Look how far we've come in just a few decades. And what I wonder is it possible that this diagram here, allegedly from a 2nd century Chinese manuscript, might in fact be far older? And is it in fact a blueprint for a particle accelerator that might have been used in opening stargates and wormholes? It's easy to imagine this vortex down here opening the gateway, and what looks like vertebrae is actually the ascent of a warp craft, which would be symbolized by the triangular apex up at the top. But then again, it's also reminiscent of the human skeletal system, isn't it? What is our body from the soul's perspective but the ladder or stairway to heaven? When we're told we're made in the image of God, that's got to be God right there. God is a particle accelerator? Well, maybe, you know. I mean, who has a dog here? Anybody here have a dog? Does your dog live in your home? Who has a dog that lives in its own home outside the house? Does anybody here have a dog house? No? Well, I have friends that have a dog house. One is very elaborate. And I always marvel at the way he has a roof on the house with these nice cedar shake shingles. He's got a deck out front, some little carpeting in there, everything but cable in this dog's house. And it struck me that the reason he does that is because he loves his dog and he shares his life with his dog. So we built him his own little home that he can live in. And the dog's home is very similar to his home, right? Well, I took that and I applied that to this diagram here. We're made in the image of God. You know, wouldn't God want us to have certain accoutrements just like God has? Well, it seems like God has the ability to open holes in space, so God would probably want us to be able to do the same thing. So he designed a home for our soul called the human body that is strikingly reminiscent of what we today can readily understand as a particle accelerator, something that has enormous destructive power, but also the potential to be used as an instrument of peace. And in this case, peace is not the absence of conflict between jealous religions or warring factions. Peace is the unity of heaven and earth. And that's what our body actually represents, is that instrument of peace. You wonder where the gate is Ladies, it's you. It's the female anatomy. That is the Stargate that we all came into this realm through. And it perfectly explains why it also resembles a particle accelerator. The female anatomy put beside this, what is possibly a particle accelerator, it's incredible. I was in Egypt and had a up-close encounter with these mysteries brought to life for me by a whirling dervish dancer. He began by creating a vortex by dancing in place, going in a circular motion. He had a skirt, and as he starts spinning the skirt, it looks like a UFO. Looks like Elijah in the whirlwind. This is Ezekiel ascending into the heavens. This is all of the Starwalkers who went up into the heavens in a whirlwind. And he continues demonstrating his absolute mastery over this. It looks the human UFO here. But he didn't stop with one skirt. He pulls out a second skirt and starts spinning it. And before I know it, the sound of that cracking sound on the floor was my jaw. Because I'm looking at this and saying, there is only one other thing that I've ever seen that looks like this. A wormhole. A wormhole. A Stargate, a gateway into another realm. And that's exactly what this whirling dervish dancer was demonstrating for us. In fact, go back just for a moment. The word dervish itself comes from the Egyptian word ru, which means gate, as in gate to God. Go ahead. And when you look at it, you find that it means gate to God. It also means one who is at the door to enlightenment. And that's exactly what that whirling dervish was demonstrating, was that he is at the door to enlightenment. Well, the ru word, the Egyptian word ru, comes from the word that means gate, or is the word that means gate, and it's always portrayed as an almond-shaped gateway. And this is why Jesus is portrayed this way at Chartres. This is how early Christians portrayed the Christ child coming into this realm, Mary delivering the child through a gate or a hole in space that matches the way modern science portrays the wormhole. Well, at the end of his dance, this dancer collapses one of his skirts and wraps it into a bundle, and his partner back here brings a linen scarf out. He takes the linen scarf and wraps it around the bundle and feeds milk to it. Yeah, please go back. Demonstrating to us that this is how the sacred child comes into this realm. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that a new divine human species is being born, and they will perfectly well understand this ancient sacred science of stargates and wormholes, and will represent the next level of human. Abydos in Egypt is the place where a lot of this ancient technology is found. Abydos is called the gate to the underworld. The gate to the underworld. Abydos is located where it is because of its proximity to a far more ancient temple, this one here called the Osirion, which was a temple dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of resurrection. And as we look at these images, what we're seeing are colossal red granite blocks, some of them weighing as much as 200 tons, that were moved around by these ancient Egyptians, or Atlanteans actually, because researchers such as John Anthony West and others believe that this temple is at least 12,000 years old. And when we're talking about a 12,000-year-old temple, we're talking about Atlantean temples. Go ahead. This is me standing beside one of these blocks so that you can get a size of the immensity, or an image of the immensity of these blocks. This type of red granite construction is found in Egypt in only two places, at the Osirion and also here at the Valley Temple beside the Sphinx, next to the Great Pyramid. This looks like something right out of the Flintstones or something in terms of the way how ancient it appears. And again, me standing in between a couple of these colossal red granite blocks that these guys just picked up and hauled around. By the way, the quarry where this red granite came from was hundreds of miles south of Giza, where that temple was located. So at the Osirion, you have this incredible imagery on one of the outside walls. And as we go to the next slide here, what we see is that we have these two figures standing on either side of a pillar with the radiant sun up here. The pillar that they're standing beside is this right here, which is actually the Egyptian hieroglyph for Osiris. What happens is the Egyptians would take this pillar right here, or this image of the pillar with the serpent levitating in it, which they called the Shuti pillar or enlightenment pillar, and they'd put it on top of this glyph right here, and it would form this complete device that they called Osiris. Osiris to the Egyptians was not a person. Many of us have probably heard of Isis and Osiris, but Osiris was not a person. Osiris to them was clearly a device. And I intentionally use the word device because the word device means appliance, tool, but it also means a symbol, like a heraldic device. And indeed, this device, which was operated by Isis, was representative of a whole line of ancient sacred sciences, including sacred geometry, including science of numbers, and probably even high energy physics. Egyptologists call it Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder. And in fact, an alternate name for this device, the Osiris device, is the tower, which means bridge or bond between heaven and earth. That's what its function was. And in this depiction here, Ramses II is serving food to this appliance, hinting that it may be, in fact, a food processor of some kind. That's a joke. But he's serving food to it. He's not serving an animal to it, nor is he serving a human to it. And what this means is that this is an instrument or device that was used exclusively for peaceful purposes. It was not used as a weapon system like some of the other religious images that we see. So here's Ramses II offering food to it. So here's your traditional image of Isis and Osiris, where he's portrayed as a green-faced god. Then here's Isis operating the true Osiris, this device. When James Arthur was alive, Mr. Mushroom, Sacred Mushroom guy, he always used to say, well, that's nothing more than a psychedelic mushroom you're looking at there. It's like, well, it's possible, but it's a lot more than that, too. What happened here? How did Osiris, the device, become Osiris, the person? The analogy I make is there's a guitar player named Les Paul. He's a 90-plus-year-old jazz musician who lives in New York City, who in the 1950s gave his name to an instrument that changed the world, the Gibson Les Paul. And when Pete Townsend picked one of these up, and when Eric Clapton picked one of these up, and especially when Jimmy Page picked up the Les Paul, they changed the world. And I think something like that happened in the ancient world with Osiris. He might have been an actual guy who gave his name to an instrument, a device that changed the ancient world, that literally could open holes in space, according to Egyptian myth and legend. And so what happens again is you take the Osiris pillar with the serpent of wisdom levitating in it, put it on top of that device right there, the ark, and you get the complete pillar, which Mr. Dana Augustine, my artistic collaborator, has rendered for us in color here. And as we look at this device, especially in color, with the exact detail as the Egyptians portrayed it, we notice something very curious about the platform that they are operating upon. First, it looks like they're drilling for oil with this thing. Go ahead. And second, it looks just like the biblical Ark of the Covenant. Or I should reverse that. The biblical Ark of the Covenant looks exactly like the Osiris device from ancient Egypt. Of course, because the Israelites got this thing from ancient Egypt. And here we see the two tablets up on top of it, which are strikingly similar in myth and legend to the tablets of the ancient Egyptians, or excuse me, of the Israelites. We call them the Ten Commandments. Well, here's something very interesting that I found at Dendera, a temple nearby Abydos. The Egyptians portrayed the divine feminine, Isis and Nephthys, operating, and it was always the divine feminine that operated this device. Hence, it was an instrument of peace, because when the guys get a hold of this stuff, you know, they want to start duking it out with one another. But now they've added the ship of Osiris to the device. And what do we notice about that ship? it almost perfectly corresponds to the way modern science portrays a wormhole. So here we have the ancient Egyptians saying, this device is the ladder or stairway to heaven. It is the bond between heaven and earth. And now they add the ship to it. It suggests to me that what this device was some kind of a particle accelerator. A particle accelerator. Some of you might have heard my interview with George Nuri when George and I talked about this, and an Egyptologist called in, and she was really snippy. You know, she's like, well, I have a master's degree in Egyptology, and they don't teach us this in college. It's like, okay, of course not. You have to actually go to Egypt and find it for yourself, because it's the only way you're going to discover it. And she said, furthermore, those aren't Stargates. That's not a wormhole portrayed there. Those are lotuses that you're seeing on either side of that ship. And I said, yes, ma'am, those are lotuses. And here's the magic question. What does the Egyptian word lotus mean? And again, she got really snippy and she says it means gate. It's like, okay. You have a left side of your brain and a right side of your brain. How about building a bridge between the two and using your whole brain? I mean, I can't say that that's what that is, but I believe that that's what it is. When you follow the trail of the stories, you're rewarded with lots of verification of that. So again, we have Isis beaming energy to Osiris upon his ship, which, for repetition's sake, again, shows us the same imagery. Here's what I think we're really dealing with here. No Egyptian text says this, but this is William Henry's take on this. I think that what the Egyptians are telling us is that it is our body that is actually this device. We see the Ark of the Covenant here. We see the Shuti pillar, the Enlightenment pillar, culminating in the two tablets up on top that correspond with the two hemispheres of our brain. We count our chakras. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children. The ladder or stairway to heaven. Again. And then when we apply the chakras to the meditating woman, applied to the pillar, it all starts to make sense. This lost Ark of the Covenant that archaeologists can't find are the first three chakras of our energy system. The reason why archaeologists can't find it is because they're always sitting on it. It's their body. The Enlightenment pillar is our spinal cord system, and the two tablets up on top, those are the two hemispheres of our brain. We are this device. In my DVD, Anointing of the Dove, which is about Mary Magdalene, I show Mary Magdalene modeling this device, where she's now superimposed upon it, embracing the energy of the Milky Way. Because in addition to functioning as that ladder or stairway, I think that the Osiris device also functioned as an antenna attracting the cosmic energy as well. Very important. Part of my supposition, or my reason for this supposition or believing in this manner, comes from this Egyptian god whose name is Ptah, who is also claimed came from Sirius. Ptah, according to the Egyptians, well, here's his business card. Hi, Ptah, architect of heaven and earth, the master craftsman of heaven in working metals, sculptor, designer, and the fashioner of the bodies of men. He's the fashioner of the bodies of men. Did I mention that Ptah is also the god who crafted the ships of eternity, the ones that look like wormholes? Well, look at this right here. Can anybody identify that symbol right there? That looks like a double helix. Jill? Yeah, here's the double helix on Ptah's business card compared to a modern depiction of the double helix. Egyptologists say there's no way, possible way, that the Egyptians had knowledge of the double helix. Well, okay, if you say so. You know? I, on the other hand, take them for what they're saying here and portraying in their imagery. They clearly understood the double helix. This is in the hieroglyph of the master craftsman who crafted the human body. Since Ptah crafted both the human body and the ship of the gods, is it possible he designed the body to interface with these interdimensional craft? I think that makes perfect sense. And what we've got to do is begin to look at our body from that perspective, as opposed to some filthy, dirty piece of crap that Western civilization, read Christianity, wants you to believe about your body. Something that is to be feared, something that is to be thought of as filthy and disgusting, that's got to be controlled, so that everything that goes in your mouth and comes out of it must somehow have to be tightly regulated by some politician or some religious figure. It's utterly ridiculous. But that's where we're at, and that's part of what we're starting to begin to shift here. An Egyptologist that I highly revere, a mathematician indeed, was named Dr. Charles Muses. He died just a few years ago. He believed that the Egyptians had developed a technology in which tones and lights and an as yet unidentified plant are used to open a rusty valve or to trigger the production of hormones from within our body, similar to those that are produced by insects, which allows the adult form to emerge. In this way, he said, they would allow the gestation or mutation of a non-molecular body, a new skin that would allow the survival of consciousness beyond death. As Muses points out in the drawing, we see 3 rays or beams of star power or energy here entering the forehead of the pupil Osiris. So they're indicating here that Osiris is in a pupil form. He's not yet in his butterfly form, if you will. He's in his pupil form here. And in Egypt, the etheric or quintessence was represented in the form of the 5-pointed star, which also means door. Right here is the determinative for walking. And what Muses suggested is that this portrays Osiris in his star body, in his crossed body, walking through a star door. A star door that was opened through the use of tones and unidentified plant that triggered this transformation. The tones, the sacred tones, which I think are actually what we think of as the Holy Grail, proposed by Muses, are used to allow us to shift through the veil of creation into the realm of pure unity of matter and energy. Based upon my investigation, I have to conclude it's these 2 tet or power pillars portrayed here that generate this frequency. These tet pillars are found especially at Dendera and are often cited by alternative Egyptologists as examples of ancient Egyptian high technology. And what we see here are figures that are tending what many have identified as cathode ray tubes or other high technology. It's the CRT that actually is what we find in our televisions and our computers. And so here are the tet pillars, the power pillars that are supporting these incredible light bulbs, if you will. Well, when we look around, we find incredible examples of these power pillars. For example, in the hieroglyph of Osiris, the tet pillars are on either side of this symbol here, which represents a gateway, and I think corresponds with the Ark of the Covenant. Now we jump down to ancient Iraq and we see the sun god Shamash entering Earth through the twin peaks, and on either side are figures that are operating pillars that are almost identical to the tet pillars. Same thing here, the sun god with the rays of light emanating from his shoulders emerges or walks through the portal here with the pillars on either side that are probably generating the frequency or vibration that enables this to happen. Same thing here, and same thing here. But this one gets just a little bit more intriguing to me because not only do we see the 2 tet or power pillars on either side and the rayed god or the light god emerging from between them, but there are also lions on top now of the tet pillars. And we can see them more clearly in these details here. There are lions on top of the tet pillars. In Egypt, they called the twin lions, when they're portrayed in this way on either side of the gateway, the star door here symbolized by the sun, they call that the Lion's Gate. And in the mystery school tradition, the Lion's Gate symbols the path out of earthly incarnation. I think there's a pun involved here because if you saw a lion on the path, it was lights out, you know, bye-bye. And so what we have here are the twin lions on either side of the sun door or the star door. Go ahead. Well, what happened is then Christianity came along. And we find a transfiguration scene where Jesus takes several of the disciples up to the mountain and transfigures into a flash of light. We see Moses on the one side, and we see Elijah on the other, and we see Jesus standing at the gate in the door. Jesus is called the Son, and he identified himself as the door. So if we put those two together, we can think of him as the sun door or the star door. Well, what the Christians clearly had done is taken out the original two Tet pillars, the power pillars, and inserted two Old Testament prophets in their place. And as a consequence, what happened is they severed our connection to the original gateway stories of the ancients. For example, Gilgamesh, who became a purified being, a pure being, whole, holy, 360, complete, did so with the help of an herb, and he did so with the help of knowledge brought by the gods. There's no mention of an herb in the story of Jesus, but there is mention of him being at the gate and transfiguring into a being of light and traveling into the heavens and then coming back to this realm in an ethereal form, a transfigured form or a metamorphosed form. Well, I think what's happened here is that all they've done is taken out the original technology that produced the frequency or vibration and replaced it with the Old Testament prophets. This is the subject of my DVD, Starwalkers and the Dimension of the Blessed, where I looked into detail at examples of other Starwalkers who affected this transformation and performed exactly the same kind of transfiguration that Jesus did. And I'm so highly intrigued by these. I've got a collection going of these, of images of Jesus standing in the gate. And I compare it now with the way NASA portrays the warp craft. What is the difference between NASA's image of the warp craft going through the wormhole and the way the early Christians were portraying Jesus in his Merkaba vehicle, his light body vehicle, traveling through the gateways? What is different is that today we think we need technology in order to do that. We think we have to build warp craft, and we think we have to build space shuttles and all this other kind of technology in order to do that. But in reality, what the ancients were telling us is that our bodies are in fact the launch pad, is the only launch pad that our soul really needs in order to return to the stars. Could you go back? So images such as this are totally inspiring my research now and leading me into a new direction. And in my upcoming works, I'll be going into more detail about this whole process of how it is that these ancients could transfigure themselves into light. And I was greatly assisted in this whole research endeavor when I was at it's actually the Bay Area UFO Expo in California last year in 2006. And this really lovely couple came up to me, they're in their mid-50s or so, very nice, and said that they had been following my research for a while and were really excited about what I was doing. And I thanked them, of course, and they said, no, listen, we're really serious about this. We both have PhDs from the Harvard Divinity School. We've lived in India. We've lived in Tibet. We know the Dalai Lama. We've been researching the most secretive aspects of the Tibetan esoteric teaching, and what you've done in your research is answered the question the Tibetans can't answer or won't answer for us. They proceeded to describe this tradition called rainbow body or light body to me. What happens is that a yogi who has achieved the highest levels of something called Do Chen can transform their body into a vortex of light. Typically, they'll enter a hut. They'll be there for 49 days. And at the end of that period, the family will enter the hut, and all that remains is hair, toenails, and fingernails that have no nerves that can be transmuted. And these yogis or lamas have transmuted their bodies into pure energy, which is what they call the rainbow body as depicted right here. What they said that I was able to answer is what happens in this process, where they go. They enter a Stargate or a wormhole. In fact, they turn their body into that Stargate. And the Tibetans themselves talk about, 28 different solar systems that they have direct knowledge of. And this presumably are the locations of where these transfigured beings, these beings who have achieved rainbow body or light body, travel to. And so what I've started to do is to make a study, a comparison of the rainbow body or light body images from Tibet with the early Christian images of Jesus transfiguring himself into a light being. Did Jesus go to Tibet or to India to learn how to do this? Is this what the original Christian message was? I think so. And as my research continues, now I'm comparing the crossed body of Osiris with the rainbow body of the Tibetans and finding some incredible linkages. In fact, this couple came to another presentation that I gave in Arizona just a couple months later, and I put up this image showing Osiris in his transfigured form and pointed out the comparison of the colors, the shapes, the patterns of the energy pattern coming from Osiris, and they just started cracking up because the Tibetans had never considered that maybe the Egyptians knew how to do this too. But yet it's clear from their artwork, their imagery, and all of the texts that accompany this imagery that that is in fact what is happening here. Go ahead. In fact, I think when we're watching the whirling dervish dancer perform his dance, notice the similarity of the colors here. Why was it that he selected those colors of his skirts? I think it's because it's an ancient understanding of the rainbow body that is being demonstrated for us here. And what I call the wormhole dance is probably the same thing the Tibetans call the rainbow body. In fact, the Dalai Lama tells us that this is the hidden potential hidden within all human beings. These methods transform us into living embodiments of wisdom, power, and compassion. And the Dalai Lama has urged that these secret teachings be introduced to a wider audience. And so I've taken that now as my mission to not necessarily fulfill this personally. That's too big a job for one person, and certainly don't have that big of an ego. But to try to piece this whole story together by going into these other traditions. The Tibetans haven't really looked outside of their own tradition to see how it's matched up with what's going on in Egypt, what's going on in ancient Iraq. But yet, it's clear to me that that's exactly what is within us. And that possibility is what, as I say, is driving my present research. And so I thought I'd conclude this evening with a comment from Terence McKenna, who says, "We are like caterpillars contemplating pupation. No longer will I chew on the cabbage leaves. No longer will I spend my time moving around on the underside of the foliage. Life must be a preparation for the transition to another dimension." We are all Starwalkers. We are all Stargate travelers. We've just simply forgotten it. And I want to thank you for enabling me to come out here and share my images, share this experience, and share this wonderful energy here in Ashland. And I think we have time now for questions, so I'll be happy to entertain any questions, comments, or suggestions that you may have. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's 1,000 times better than on the radio. On the way in, I know some posters out here that John Major Jenkins will be speaking here in a couple weeks, sponsored by the Native American Student Union, and talking about the Mayan calendar and
Excellent.
2012 and all that.
Yeah.
And in studying about some Native American studies, I read that the Navajos say that when the person leaves here, when the spirit leaves here, they walk the great white road in the sky, which is what we call the Milky Way.
There you go.
And my question is, one that I've had on my list of things to do that I haven't got to yet, so maybe you've already done it. But you mentioned different religions and Kabbalah, and I've been wondering what the literal translation of the word Kabbalah is, because you have the Kabbalah, and you have the Shambhala,
right.
You have the Valhalla, and the Allahs and all there.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have gotten that.
No, yeah, that's a good question, though. I mean, the Egyptian Ka, the word Ka was very important to Egyptians, referred to one of their energy bodies. So did the Ba, referred to the soul. And then Allah simply means light. So from that perspective, Kabbalah could refer to like Merkaba, space-time light vehicle, a method of ascension. Yeah. No more questions? Golly. Well, I guess, yeah.
Please come up to the mic if you don't mind.
You've seen many of this gentleman's images tonight. This is Mr. Dana Augustine.
It's his fault. Been doing, how many have we done now? 20?
About 5 years now we've been working together.
And we got to the point where it's like, okay, and you want some wows and pows and blue apples? Yeah. Anyway, when I was 31, I had a near-death experience here in Ashland. I had a slip and fall, came down like this. Suddenly there was just like this shock of blue light that went through me. I think we've spoke about this before. And I'm suddenly looking down at my body. And I suddenly knew everything I ever wanted to know about anything and everything. All the punchlines to all the jokes that life had set up, I knew. And I didn't care about my belongings on the street there or anything. And it's interesting when you said that in the Blake picture there, that he knew suddenly everything. Everything was everything. And I had the chance to come back. A voice, not my own, said, "Do you want to go or stay?" And I said, "No, I got stuff to do." Sucked back in. But I get little bits and pieces of what I suddenly found out up there. So when people worry about dying, don't. Because when you're transitioning, you're going to go, "Oh, that's what it meant." So.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions. I want to ask you about the Anunnaki. I want to ask you about the sacred solfeggio tones from the Book of Daniel and the Bible that were the original Gregorian chant tones that were taken away and hidden, and they're coming out. I want to ask you, this is the only crowd I could ever ask this. I just had this feeling that the whole stuff going on in our government with the Middle East hasn't really been about oil. I mean, it's a great cover story for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
But for controlling mankind, I wonder if the Stargate wormhole over Iraq, the Anunnaki who came from deep space had to come in somehow.
Yeah.
Could you comment, and do you know about the solfeggio tones?
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, sure.
So,
wow, that's a loaded question right there. Yeah, thanks for asking that too, by the way. I first started, I broke the Iraq Stargate story. Let me just end at the beginning, or begin at the end. I started following Saddam Hussein's interest in all this business back in 1998. In my first interview with Art Bell, I brought it up. And I had first, of course, learned about it back in '91 in the first Gulf War, when the prophecy watchers were talking about Saddam and his belief that he's the reincarnated biblical king Nebuchadnezzar. And I latched onto that and started really following him very intently from then, especially through the art newspapers. The international art newspapers were closely watching Saddam too, because he was assembling this amazing collection of ancient Sumerian cylinder seals, like the ones I showed here, that show the gods in their craft, and the gods standing before this gateway, and the gods with this device over here. And a lot of this coming out of the work of Zecharia Sitchin as well. And Saddam must have been reading Sitchin, I don't know. But he started the Saddam Hussein School for Cuneiform Studies. Like Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany had amassed one of the largest collections of Holy Grail books, ancient Germanic mythology, anything that had to do with Atlantis. The Nazis piled it all together at a place called Wewelsburg. Well, Saddam did the same thing in Baghdad. He believed he's Nebuchadnezzar, he's reincarnated, he's got to outdo what he had done in a previous life. Now, it's important to know that in Nebuchadnezzar's time, he had a giant device in Babylon called the golden image of the beast. They tried music to get this thing to work, they tried clapping, they tried other instruments, they tried dancing, they tried everything they could, but they couldn't get it to work. They had this giant piece of hardware. They knew then that only the Jewish priests at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem had the software to make this device work. So Nebuchadnezzar, Saddam, went into Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and took the Jews captive and brought them back to Babylon, including Ezekiel, including Daniel, including 3 wise men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And in this really strange story, and this is where the whole Iraqi Stargate story comes from. There's a lot of people that talk about it, but unless you start from this place, it's the only place it really makes sense, because this is where it comes from. And again, not to toot my own horn, I'm the one who really started following that and said, this is why we're in Iraq. It has to do with this here. Well, what happens is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are brought to Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar bets them that if they can make this golden image of the beast work, that he will convert to their religion. So the 3 wise men agree to this bet. And what happens is that there's something called the fiery furnace that is attached to this golden image of the beast. The 3 wise men put on their coat, their hats, and their other garments, and they enter this fiery furnace. And they come back out. And Nebuchadnezzar and his men are assembled around him, and they're in shock that these 3 guys aren't like marshmallows. Not only do they come back out in pristine condition, but they're not alone. Depending upon which version of the book of Daniel you read, it says the Son of God was in tow with them, or one like the Son of God. Like Jesus? No, not Jesus. His name was Nabu, which means the Lord. In fact, this is where Nebuchadnezzar got his name. Nabucodonosor comes from this being that came through this fiery furnace, read Stargate. And in fact, they built whole temples to this guy. Whole ziggurats, libraries were devoted to Nabu and his wife, who he brought along with him. And we're not exactly sure what was in those temples, but I'm pretty certain that Saddam Hussein was certain what was in those temples, and he actually recovered what was in those libraries, which undoubtedly had to do with the secrets of this gateway that was opened by these 3 wise men, and through which this Lord, undoubtedly an Anunnaki royal being, came into this realm. Because when you see the highest level of the Anunnaki, they who came to earth from the heavens, entering the earth, they're not in NASA-style rocket ships like Sitchin shows. And even in his books, he shows they're clearly coming into this realm through gateways. I mean, Sitchin himself says that the Anunnaki are something like 3,000 years advanced in their evolution from where we're at right now. Well, look at the images I just showed you tonight of what we're imagining today in the open literature. You mean to tell me the Anunnaki came here in rocket ships? That's ridiculous. They were undoubtedly, to me, some kind of a Stargate or wormhole traveling civilization. They're probably responsible for a lot of the imagery that we looked at tonight. So Saddam Hussein unquestionably was gathering all this together. The art newspapers verified it. In fact, he went to the British Museum and said to the British people, you know, you guys were here for 30 years in the late 1800s. You looted this country. Bring it back. Bring it back. He went to the Germans. He went to the Berlin Museum and said, you stole the Ishtar Gate from Babylon. I want it back. Why? Well, in my words, because he was building a Disneyland for the Anunnaki. Saddam Hussein was trying to get a tourist business going. He wasn't, out to threaten anybody. He's looking at Egypt and seeing all the money the Egyptian tourist industry makes, and he was trying to do the same thing in Iraq and did an incredible job. I mean, went around and assembled the most massive library of ancient texts that rivals anything that you see at the University of Pennsylvania, the Oriental Museum in Chicago, anywhere. But here's where the problem really kind of comes in with Saddam. University of Pennsylvania was one of the first archaeological teams that went into Iraq in the mid-1800s. The Oriental Museum in Chicago, University of Chicago, which was founded by John D. Rockefeller, was another. These people were fundamentalist Christians who sent archaeologists into Iraq and into the Holy Land to prove that the Bible was true. They were in a race against German scholars sent by German financiers who were there digging up the same land in the same temples, but they were there to prove that Atlantis was true, because Germanic heritage is traced back to Atlantis. Well, that's kind of the big threat that Saddam ultimately posed to Western civilization. Here he has all this massive knowledge, of which Zecharia Sitchin's books, for example, just represent a tiny tip of the iceberg, that potentially can just pull the rug out of Western civilization, because it literally proves that the Bible, as Sitchin has proposed, is literally stolen from the ancient Iraqis. There's nothing original about any of the New Testament or Old Testament characters. It all comes back to ancient Iraq and the Anunnaki. And were Saddam Hussein to have been successful in releasing a lot of this data, it would have posed a tremendous threat to the rapture-crazy inhabitants of the White House. So something had to be done. That's just one dynamic of this. And so, as I said, I started covering this and talking about it in the 90s, and you could just watch it all happen. And then, of course, as soon as we enter Iraq, what's the first thing that we made a beeline for? The Iraqi National Museum, Saddam Hussein's prized collection of this ancient knowledge that explicitly describes these beings coming and going from the stars. So based on that, and especially that in my interpretation of the book of Daniel in that episode, I'm absolutely convinced that there's a Stargate in Iraq, and that's what we went there to control. And then the oil and everything else is just kind of secondary. So
where's all the stuff they stole?
Where's all the stuff? Yeah, that's the question. I don't think that one answer would be we destroyed it. But I think what the future generations are going to see is that this is kind of like the Library of Alexandria, which was destroyed by the Christians. Set human civilization back probably 10,000 years, maybe a little more. People think that's in the basement of the Vatican. Where's all the stuff we took from the Iraqi National Museum? It's probably in Los Alamos, maybe Langley. We probably brought it back here, but it won't ever see the light of day because it's just simply too threatening. Good question, thank you. Anyone else? You guys are very quiet. Oh, yes, Carolyn.
Well, thank you for a great presentation. As
Thank
I told
you.
you, I also listened to your talk called The Power of the Awakened Heart, which is something I'm very interested in, and I know that the heart was called or is called the doorway to everything, and that when you measure the electromagnetic field, the heart generates one about 4,000 times greater than that of the brain. And in your talk, you began to talk about the Egyptian view of the heart and having to purify it. And I wondered if you could tie that in somewhat, more of your understanding of the heart and how it relates to the rainbow body and this whole topic.
Yeah. Before I do that, let me mention, I think the reason why George Bush was shown in the Seal of Atlantis in 2004 is because it said, hey, baby, we got it. We did it. And for those who could read the symbolism, it was explicit, and it certainly was to me. I mean, it just says, we got it. And yeah, I'm the king of the new Atlantis here. So yeah, the transformation of the heart as the vehicle that opens this, the rainbow body, is something that I'm just beginning really to to really look at. The Tibetans talk about something called tiglays, and I talked about this in my Starwalkers in the Dimension of the Blessed presentation, where they describe these spheres that come out of the heart, that come up through what they call the Kati crystal channel, and they come out through the eyes. And these are literally spheres of light that appear in front of people. Well, Swami Muktananda and others also talk about these blue spheres. They're called blue pearls, they're called blue stones, blue apples, lots of different names for these. And what they are balls of light that come out through the eyes, or can be manifested in front of us, that literally can be opened to the size of a human being, so that a human being can step in them and travel into other dimensions. And in that presentation, I show artwork from the ancient world depicting these blue spheres. They also talk about these blue spheres or blue lights actually entering into humans as well. And so it seems that the heart is probably the motor for this transformation, and achieving that state of lightheartedness has to do with having the belief of a child, for one thing, but also being free of fear completely. And that's why I used the affirmation earlier. Simply, I am love is probably the most powerful affirmation that we can begin to incorporate in our lives, because that is what is going to tune the energy of our heart, that will begin to create this field around us that will begin to attract to us that which we do want. And what we do want is to be able to ultimately to, at least in my case, live a long life so that I can spend a long time absorbing these teachings, and in this lifetime be able to achieve this transformation, which is something that's like, feels like a really high mountain, but actually it's not that hard, is what I've been told. It's a lot simpler than it's made out to be. So, thank you. Good question.
I read on, I think it was Yahoo News, that scientists discovered a double helix coming out of the center of the Milky Way. So I just thought that was interesting, as above, so below.
Right, good one. Yeah, it's a really neat image. They show this kind of vortex. It is actually a double helix, which is really wild, because so many shamanic traditions teach us that the center of the Milky Way is the location where our souls came from or through. And then when that image came out, it's very striking, because it also corresponds, of course, to the whole Maya serpent rope idea, that from out of the center of the Milky Way will come this serpent rope that will bring about this awakening. So very exciting that we're able to actually photograph this stuff and bring it up close. There's a saying over the Temple of Isis that no mortal hath pulled back her veil. Well, if we think of Isis as the Milky Way, we are pulling back the veil of the Milky Way, and a lot of other galaxies as well. And so it's possible for us to think that maybe we're not mortal like we think any longer. Maybe we really are joining the realm of the immortals.
You know, Doris Lessing wrote a book called Shakasta.
Yeah.
You read it?
Yeah.
And two things about that. She said that there are these stargates all over the planet, and that Atlantis and Egypt and many places all over the planet were stargates, that they were all different geometric configurations and different sound vibrations. And that's when the planet was called Rotunda and was in connection with the central headquarters of the Milky Way. And that we're coming back to a time when that connection will be established again, that we've been in the fall.
No, we got chemtrails to have taken care of that. So.
And we're going to remember our Stargate knowledge. But she portrays a big battle between dualistic forces of good and evil. And the book actually ends on a downer note that the negative forces are taking over. And when you talk about George Bush standing in that position, I wonder what you think about the forces of good and evil and potential dualistic battles that could end one way or the other. in light of what we're all talking about nowadays about oneness consciousness and an overcoming of dualism?
Sorry. No, it's a very good question, actually. I always have to internalize everything. I mean, that battle between good and evil goes on inside of every one of us, and so does the battle. And so to the extent that you and I are able to achieve that unity within ourselves, then we become models for others that are going to be able to do that as well. And that's what makes it so tough. I mean, we're just constantly bombarded by these images of divisiveness and separation. And I showed the wormhole dancer earlier. I went and interviewed him after his dance through his interpreter. I asked him, what were you doing? And he said, well, I'm telling the story of the unity of heaven and earth. I'm like, yeah, no kidding, You're also what we think of as a wormhole in the West. And just imagine if we could take the $1 trillion that we're investing into the war on terror and apply it into technologies and ideas, concepts, such as what we saw in that wormhole dance. That's how we can begin to achieve peace here. And we just have to be open to the idea that we can actually build that bridge. And how we do it is simply by recognizing that vortex is inside of us and harmonize the male, female inside of us, the good and the evil, the light and the dark within ourselves, and then begin to shine that light that will begin to transform everyone. Everybody can do that. Everybody, I think, should be doing that. Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on the idea that the last questioner brought up about the stargates all over the planet, and having read about this polar shift that's happening. And one of the theories that I've heard is that it's not going to be just a reversal of north and south poles, but there will be multiple poles around the planet and with different vibrations, and that there's a vibrational level. This is, where did I hear this? I think from David Sheehan. Anyway, it makes me think of that idea of stargates all over the planet, if this vibrational change is happening and these poles are going on. And I wanted to thank you for what you just said about being a model within ourselves and this idea of dualities and whatnot going on. When I was studying literature and I was studying Shakespeare, and I was thinking, how did this guy get all that imagery and all that metaphor? And did he get it all, or did it just happen because it's all in us? And so I appreciate what you were saying, is that we have this knowledge in us, and it's showing up in all of this artwork. And even the people who created the art, I wonder sometimes, did they really know what they were creating, or is it just coming out through us? And that's where I get my hope, is that it will come out and show us something. But I wondered if you'd heard about the polar.
No, but as you're saying that, it reminds me of something that's attributed to Plato when he's describing Atlantis, that if you could see the true Earth from afar, it would appear as a 12-angled pyramid. And the Egyptians picked up that idea, and they showed that at each of the 12 points of the dodecahedron, the 12-angled pyramid, there are holes in space. And I'm reminded of Diane Wehu. She's a 27th generation Cherokee Indian storyteller who lived in Tennessee, East Tennessee. She lives up in Vermont now, but she grew up in Tennessee. And in East Tennessee, where the Cherokee live, in their creation mythology says that they were created by beings of light who rode a sound wave from the Pleiades. And through a hole in space came to East Tennessee and created the Cherokee as one of 12 tribes, as guardians of 12 vortexes spread around the planet. It's like, wow. That's a cool creation mythology. I can really dig that, and so every time I'm driving over through East Tennessee, especially in the Smoky Mountains, the oldest mountains on the planet, I just think about that and try to connect with that kind of consciousness. But it suggests that around the whole planet there are in fact 12 gates, 12 Stargates. And when you like go to the book of Revelation, they describe the central throne of Christ, if you will, Christ not being a person but an energy, as having 12 gates as well. And so that idea shows up all over the place. There's 12 cranial nerves in our brain. You just wonder if that's another whole correspondence of linkage that we can make there. And so we really don't have just the 2 poles of our brain. We probably have more like 12. And if you start thinking in that kind of consciousness, I think it would be something really remarkable. So thank you.
Well, this has been very exciting to me because I
good.
followed all of your interviews on Coast. And especially that you relate the outer technology to the inner technology, which is the real thing. And I am, and then a few of us here, we're initiated into the inner sound and light, which is, so to us the Stargate is the third eye. And you spoke about tones, and I hadn't heard about these particular tones that were mentioned tonight, but we meditate on inner sound, and these sound frequencies take us up. We can, they're virtually signature sounds. You can tell which plane or which dimension you're in by these signature sounds that you hear. So it could be the tones you refer to now. I don't know, but it's also like celestial music, music of the spheres, because everything's created with sound and light, you know, frequencies.
Yeah.
And what you just mentioned about the blue spheres, it was interesting because I used to see these sometimes in our meditation hall at our retreat center here. I'd see this blue sphere of light kind of moving across. I go, what's that, you know? Except that it was beautiful, I knew it was something good, but so this is the first time I've heard about anything about what it might be. And
Have you guys seen The Last Mimsy yet? Yeah, right on. Isn't that incredible? Yeah, so these kids, this dodecahedron-shaped treasure box washes ashore. They open it up, and there's these blue stones in there. And it turns out the one character calls these blue stones, I won't tell the ending, but she calls them spinners. And so these blue stones start spinning, and they open stargates. And these kids, their consciousness is accelerated by their contact with these blue, the last Mimsy. M-I-M-Z-Y. Yeah, it's incredible in the imagery. And it's like, wow, here's another manifestation of this. And I actually had people call me saying, hey, this guy must have been reading your book Blue Apples or something, because here's these blue stones that open wormholes. And it's like, there it is. It's really incredible.
And Inanna wore blue stones on
And Inanna wore the blue stones, yeah.
her craft helmet.
Yeah, she's reminded me of the craft helmet, right. So, very good. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing stuff that we're seeing in the films, and even in our technology. I mean, the blue apples. I like to tell the story about when I wrote my book Blue Apples in 1999. I wrote Steve Jobs of Apple Computer because I knew that he and the Beatles were in a battle for control of the icon or the image of the apple. The Beatles sued Apple Computer because they said, we own the apple. Especially an apple that plays any kind of a music. And so Steve Jobs said, well, my computer's not going to play music. And so the Beatles said, well, fine, give us $30 million, we'll go away. And they did for a little while. And so knowing that they're touchy about this, I wrote Steve Jobs and said, dear Steve, wrote this book called Blue Apples. I'm going to use the blue apple as my logo. No, you're really touchy about all this. Don't want you to sue me. So can I just let you know I'm going to do this? If you have any opinions on it, please let me know. And I get a nice letter back from their legal department that says, essentially there's no such thing as a blue apple. It's like, well, of course not. That's why the alchemists use that image, because until you imagine it, it doesn't exist. But once you imagine something like a blue apple, then you can go figure out how it might be possible to manifest it. Well, a few years go by, and at that time, Apple was using the rainbow-colored apple for their logo. And then just a few years ago, I got a new Apple PowerBook computer, and I had a little problem setting it up, so I called Apple customer service. And the guy said, yeah, sure, please go up to the left-hand corner of your screen and click on the blue apple. I said, sure, no problem. There is a blue apple now, and the blue apple is the symbol, the logo, for the most powerful computer on the planet at the consumer level, the most important machine going right now. And so, yeah, it's just a manifestation away. A lot of this ancient stuff is reoccurring in our modern world, and we're seeing it all the time. And it just reminds me of this whole idea of the Mayan calendar, of this acceleration that we're going to experience in the next few years. And that's how a lot of this can really begin to manifest, and very quickly. I mean, some of this you look at, it's like, oh, that's just too wild for me. Stargates, wormholes, never going to happen. But in fact, the whole premise of the Maya end date is that there will be this incredible acceleration as we get towards 2012, and stuff that we thought might not happen for 1,000 years might begin to manifest in the next 10. So it is within the realm of possibility that this is going to happen. And you and I are kind of in the position of the cocoon to the butterfly. You'll never get me up in one of those. What do you mean I'm going to transmute this body into pure energy or pure light? I mean, I can't shop at Walmart then. It's like, well, there's a trade-off we have to make. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where it's at right now. And so I just gave a presentation in Nashville on light body and immortality, and one of the key points is that we just really have to start reshaping our lives and changing our priorities for this emerging spiritual reality. And I think a lot of people here are already making those choices. At least that's what I pick up as I'm walking and driving around Ashland. It's really incredible what you all are doing here. So I compliment you on your community. It's really, really special.
We just had people from the Dominauer.
Oh, Dominher, yeah,
Right.
Sure.
And the images, the sphere, the things that you talked about, have you been there and what?
No, but I understand there's a beautiful book available, and would like to get a copy of it.
A lot of the symbology.
Right.
VHS at our library, you might be able to take a look at.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's great to know.
Thank you for your profound wisdom and sharing it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment about the rainbow body and the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I know is the yogis know of this technique called samadhi.
Mm-hmm.
And it's where it's the bridge between you go through the 8 limbs of yoga,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a bridge that takes you to your astral body.
Mm-hmm.
And the yogis practice this in India. And I wonder if you'd like to comment on that. Do you think that's the way to get into the rainbow body?
Yeah, I mean, not having done it in this lifetime, I really don't know. Can't speak from experience. But one thing that is clear is that we all do have gods within us. And, living in the South, I grew up in Detroit, and then I moved to the South where people talk a little slow. And so, gods are, you can spell that G-U-I-D-E-S, guides, but they pronounce it gods in the South. So I started getting on this idea that we all do have these gods within us. And it's these gods that know how to do this. And if there's one thing I could impart tonight, it would be to expand your spiritual perception like Jacob must have before he scaled the ladder to heaven. He must have expanded his spiritual perception to include his guides within, because you noticed in a lot of those depictions you had the figure central in the middle, but then there were the 2 gods or guides on either side, posed as either Moses or Elijah or even the Tet pillars. And I think that those are aspects of ourselves. The Egyptians were very clear about this, that in their light body teaching, that we all have at least 12 guides within us that have this knowledge, but we spend our lives pretty much oblivious to this guidance within us. And so perhaps in your own way, in your own time, you can begin to just ask yourself about those guides and begin to connect with them, because it is those parts of ourselves that will be able to help you affect the ultimate transformation or transition in our lives. So, good question.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, thank you also. But there's 3 books curious if you've read. Handbook for a New Paradigm,
No.
Embracing the Rainbow, and Becoming. They're, I would suggest everyone here who's interested in this, they're 3 books that have been channeled from higher consciousness beings into a human who wrote them. The author isn't named in it, and they're basically messages for us to things we can do to help raise our vibrations to make us be able to be ready for this period to come, and things inside of it that it talks about would be like sustainability being important, kind of like not going to Walmart, because that's living in joy and just being happy about life and finding things to make you happy, because that's a higher vibrational emotion. It's kind of the same thing. Joy and love kind of go hand in hand together. And nutrition and what we're eating is also essential. So I would suggest, learning what is really healthy for us, and it's not, and cooked food is dead, and it's not a high vibrational food. So that's something else to really be aware of. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? This side of the room is very quiet over here. Maybe we can have someone. Could you all? Huh? Oh, okay.
I do have a comment that I did want to make about when you were talking about the rainbow body, and I know we all noticed that the sirens were going, and the other meanings for sirens are, those truth singers that are depicted either as mermaids or winged creatures, and they would sing sailors to their death, but death is a portal, and so I just thought that was a good synchronicity that the truth was being noticed there.
Yeah, that as you're saying siren, and again in the South, I went to my neighbor and said, I'm going to France this summer, I'm going to go visit CERN, and he's like, well, what's it CERN? It's like CERN. So, but CERN is something that's very important. The Center for European Nuclear Research, where they're built this 17-mile round underground tunnel where they're searching for the elusive God particle. And it may well be that the discovery of this God particle is going to represent an incredible moment that will kind of, I think, really introduce a new era for us. We talked about the serpent rope a moment ago in the Mayan concept of the serpent rope. Well, in addition to this enlightened being coming out of this serpent rope, they also talk about something that they call sap. They call it cosmic sap will come out of this serpent rope or wormhole. And this cosmic sap is referred to as the blessed substance of the sky and was very important to the Mayans. And when I looked up sap on Google, I saw first the Mayan reference to it as this cosmic sap, which they called eats. And then a couple of lines down, there was a reference to high energy physics. And there I see the word SAP, and it immediately struck me that what SAP is an acronym for subatomic particle. So the Mayans are saying 2012, serpent rope, wormhole opens, out comes this cosmic SAP. Well, what if that is a subatomic particle? And right on time, here comes CERN building the largest machine in the world, a 17-mile round underground tunnel that's purpose is to search for an elusive subatomic particle. And with the discovery of this subatomic particle that they call the God particle, they expect to prove the existence of other dimensions. And when I look at that, it suggests to me that ring that they've created is sort of like that chakra of power that we saw in that figure's hands a moment ago, the ring of cosmic sovereignty. And it may be that with this discovery, it will represent the ascension of our species out of cosmic kindergarten into first grade, cosmically speaking, which is going to be incredible for our species. But, of course, human ego gets involved. It's Fermilab in Chicago that was building one of the magnets for the CERN particle accelerator. And Fermilab is also searching for the God particle. Well, what do you know? When Fermilab installs this giant magnet, they made a basic error in arithmetic, and the thing isn't working now, and it has set CERN back by nobody knows how far. And so, of course, people are talking conspiracy, they're talking sabotage that Fermilab is, which of course is now in the forefront of this race, whereas before they were way behind CERN, might have had some, kind of funny business going on. But I'm going to CERN in June to take a look at it firsthand to kind of just get a sense for what's going on. There's no religious symbolism at CERN except for Shiva, the Lord of the Dance, dancing on ignorance. And it suggests to me that, wow, they know a lot more than what they're saying publicly at CERN. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment on that. When I had heard about the particle accelerator at CERN, there was concern that indeed we would take a leap to another dimension, that in fact it could dissolve the Earth, if not the solar system.
Yeah, one of the concerns about the firing up of this particle accelerator is that it might not just cause the destruction of the Earth, but the destruction of the universe itself. So, yeah, right. Rapture. Rapture. Right, yes.
I just started studying like the golden spiral and the golden rectangle and the, was it 1.613 proportion. I was wondering if you kind of came across that. I know that the Great Pyramids are built upon this certain proportion.
Yeah, I've actually just embarked on that study of the golden ratio myself. Again, I live in Nashville, where we have a scale replica of the Parthenon as it existed in ancient Greece. It's considered a book in stone, and it's a perfect example of phi geometry. And so I'm just now really beginning an in-depth study of that. So maybe next time I come back, we'll both be a little further down the road. You had a question over here? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh. Come over here. Applegate. It's funny.
Was it Thompson Creek Road? I don't know the exact location.
Go ahead. Just that George W. Bush frequently visits Applegate here in Oregon, and good wine.
Yes, great music.
Hi.
Hello. I've been studying Mayan cosmology for about 5 years, and I couldn't help but notice the symbology in the Rainbow Bridge in relation to the colors of the solar seals of the Mayan archetypes.
Great.
And I noticed that there was yellow, and then the dark, which is represented in black, and then the white, of course, being the core of the gate, so and the red, which was the primal energy, and then of course those light frequencies, which are represented by the archetypes of the Mayan astrology, in combination with the galactic tones, which are the sound frequencies, actually create what is called the harmonic module. And so, to me, in those representations of the rainbow light body, I look at practical applications that are now being brought out to society, such as the study of what they call the Zolkin, which is basically a formatted text of a movement of light and sound frequencies that can actually help us access those archetypes of the greater, levels of consciousness in our beings. And I was wondering if there was any more information that you had found in the Mayan cosmology.
No, but I'm really glad you brought that up, because I knew it had to be there, and I'm very interested in that. So I would like to get with you in a moment and get a source for that, because have you seen color images of those? Okay.
And it varies between some modern study with Jose Arguellos and actually, what was found in the codices, of the written text. I'm not sure where the colors came from, but I could not help but notice that,
right.
That light body, but then in the skirt itself even, there was a dark tone, a red, and yellow.
Wow.
That created, potentially that pathway for the light to travel.
Wow. Awesome.
Based on the tonal frequencies.
Yeah.
So it's essentially the same thing.
what she said is that we were looking at the images of the light body, that she has found the same colors in the Mayan representations of the light body. And I was thinking that they had to be there, and so what she's saying is that there they are. And so she's been studying Jose Arguelles and Tzolk'in and all of that and finding it, and she's obviously going to be our next speaker because she's right on, really got it going. Thank you. Okay.
Just about 2 months ago, we had a visit from a Mayan specialist, Judith Lightfeather, and she was talking about how the tonal glyphs that she's talking about are all star beings that are constantly activating our physical bodies, that we're the micro of that macro. And in Nassim Haramein's work, he had created an equation that proved that we are smack dead center in the middle of what we can see as the macro and the micro. So when we create this little, through CERN, and we can see the God particle, I'm sure that we're going to be able to see something big too.
Love it. Great comment. Thank you.
Hi, William.
Hi.
Are you familiar with Lakota star maps?
No.
The Star Globe program?
Mm-mm.
Well, the Lakota star maps are
I've got a lot of reading to do. Y'all are.
They're Native American prophecy that liken the Mayan prophecy, and they were written on hides over 500 years ago. And they say around this time we're going to align, magnetic north will align with Polaris, the North Star, once again, as it did in the days of Christ. And they date the birth of Christ to 5 BC. And when you look at the map astrologically, it's a perfect Star of David. It's a Merkaba. And they date the death of Christ at 28 AD. It's a perfect Merkaba, only it's elongated because Venus has ascended. And they say that time is now, 5 years off. They say 2012 is 2007. So I believe between now and 2012, when there's tremendous astronomical lineups and also a transit of Venus across the sun, that we are in that Stargate now, and we are accelerating up until 2012 to a quantum consciousness level. And I just want people to know that according to Native American prophecy, it's now.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I also have another correlation that is actually really interesting, which is been brought to light by the Mayan Astrology, which is in relation to what they call the Hunabku, which is what they refer to as the center of the galaxy.
Right.
And actually an umbilical cord called I think I pronounce it the Kuaksam or something like that, where at one reference point is our personal perception of the eye in relation to this cord which takes us to the center of the galaxy. Well, it seems really interesting to me that the representation of the snake is always used in that method of travel. Well, if we look at the real method of our energy travel, of course it's the force of the Kundalini, the cosmic snake that starts at the root of the lotus, gathers and travels through the channel, and then up out the lotus of the crown chakra. Very much representation also of that survival, that instinct of our eye, of our instinctual perception of self, traveling through all of the frequencies of being up into the source. And I just thought I would bring that up, that it is very apparent, I'm sure in other ways too, but this is basically the principle that they're working on right now, which very much correlates with what the woman just said, is that we are actually traveling now through that space portal where we are literally going to be, in essence, eaten by the cosmic crocodile of beginning, born, for lack of better terms, into this new galactic frequency, which I think very much is represented through the cross-references I've read, about the frequency increase and basically the gateway to God that we will all be bestowed with.
Right.
So just an interesting correlation.
1,000 years of peace on the way. Yeah, very good.
So I want to thank William Henry for coming tonight, then thank all of you for coming tonight too.
Thank you very much.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.